Do you need to increase your web development skills to ensure that you find your dream job within the tech industry as fast as possible? That's what I thought, and that's exactly what I'm going to help you with in this video. Hey, how's it going, guys? This is Max here from Deal Development, and today we are going to be building a full stack shopping cart application using React, Redux, and Firebase. These are all essential and hot technologies that will help you to level up your skills and land your dream job. We will be also using styled components to style our app, so expect a crash course on that. We'll be using Redux for our state management, which is also going to act as the data layer between our React frontend and our Firebase database. So, if you don't have any experience with Redux or Firebase, that is totally okay, as I will be explaining these technologies as best as possible for beginners. So, without further ado, I hope you guys are very excited for this build. I think it's going to really help you out a lot and level up your skills, so let's go right ahead and get started. Alright guys, so let's get started with our general setup. I'm here in a new instance of VS Code and I'm inside my full stack shopping cart folder, which is on my desktop. I'm going to run npx create react app and a dot to put it in that folder. Let's just wait for that to finish. Cool, so now that our project has been created, the next thing I'm going to try to do is install the dependencies that we're going to need. And I think a good idea would be to start with the Redux dependencies. So I'm going to be using yarn. So I'm going to say yarn add Redux. That's obviously the main Redux package. React Redux, which is the Redux package specifically made for React. I'm also going to install Redux Thunk, which is an extension that's going to allow us to make asynchronous calls, which I'll explain a little bit later as well. We're also going to be using the Redux-DevTools-extension. We can make use of those awesome dev tools. So I think let's install just those for now. That should be all the Redux stuff that we need. So once we have the Redux packages installed, I'm going to go ahead and install with yarn add React router DOM with dashes. That's going to be our routing package we're going to use. Then we're going to also need styled dash components. That's how we're going to be using our styling in this project. Then we're also going to need Firebase. This is going to be a local Firebase install, so you might have to also install it globally with the -g flag. So just make a note of that. And I think that's good for now. Let's install those three dependencies. Cool, so once those are installed, let's go inside our src folder. Have a look. We don't need this test file. We can delete that. And also delete the logo. Let's go to app.js and delete everything inside the main div. Let's delete this logo import. Save. I'll just leave the app CSS file for now, because that will pretty much be overwritten by our styled components later. Our index.js, we can leave that for now, and I think we can get started by creating our Redux store. So for that, I'm going to create a new file called store.js. And then inside that file, we're going to do a couple of things to initialize our Redux store. So I'm going to import create store camel case combine reduces, also camel case, and apply middleware. And those are all going to come from the Redux package. Okay. We're also going to need the Thunk object from the Redux Thunk package, which I will explain in a bit. And we're also going to import our compose with dev tools from the Redux DevTools extension. Okay, then below that, we're going to say const reducer. So this is going to be our main reducer object, and that's going to be equal to the combine reducers function. We're going to combine two reducers in this project. The first one is going to be our cart reducer, and the second one is going to be our products reducer. And essentially, these two combined is going to give us everything we need. We'll come back to it in a little bit. Then I'm going to make another variable, which is going to be called initial state. That's just going to be an empty object for now. So the initial state usually begins as an empty object. Then I'm going to create a variable that is called middleware, which is going to be equal to the thunk object from the Redux thunk package. And you need to wrap it in some array brackets just like that. And now finally we need to create our store variable. And that's going to be equal to the create store function, which we've imported from Redux. So we open that up like this. And inside we're going to pass in our main reducer, our initial state, and finally we're going to be using this compose with DevTools function. And inside there, we're going to use the apply middleware function. And we're going to open up some brackets and use the spread operator and pass in the middleware object, which has been assigned to thunk. So that will allow us to, seems like I've done something wrong here. Let's just have a look. Ah, yes, I see now. We do not need these squiggly braces. We just need the normal brackets just like that. So that is our store variable. It takes in our main reducer, which we're going to have combined reducers from our cart and products pages, which we will do in a sec. It takes in our initial state, which is just an empty object. And it's going to take in our DevTools middleware thunk object as well. And then finally at the bottom, we need to just export default as store. So we can use that in our index.js file. So we go to our index.js file. What we're going to do here is firstly import the provider from React Redux. So this is our main store provider, the provider from React Redux. And then what we do, we don't need to render the app in strict mode, so I'll delete that. And we're going to wrap the app in our provider. Just like that. You can move the app inside there. Save. Oh, we need a comma there. Okay, save. Then we can say in our provider, we need to pass in a store, and that's going to be equal to the store that we just created. So we need to import that as well. So let's go ahead and do that. We just import store from store.js file, just like that. Because remember, we've exported it here. So that's going to enable us to use Redux in our app. So now that we've got a basic boilerplate for Redux installed and it should be up and running pretty well, I think the next thing we can do is go ahead and create a components folder. Components. Then within there, I'm going to have two different folders. The first one is going to be for cart components. The other one is going to be for product components. So we get back there in a bit. We're also going to create a folder for styles, just like that. Then for these styles, what I'm going to do is just copy and paste them right in here. Cool. So if you guys can go ahead and click on the link to my GitHub repo for this project, which should be in the description of this video. We've got two files inside the styles folder, where you've got a cart screen.js and a product screen.js. And we're using styled components here to render out different styles for our cart screen and for our product screen. And essentially with styled components, you can export variables. So you can export a const. For instance, we've got the cart container style, which is a styled.div. So this just means it's using an HTML div with these properties, and every time you wrap a specific element in one of these variables, essentially, it's going to give you all these styles. And there's some really cool stuff you can do, like you can use props to render out different kind of colors depending on what you pass in to the variable, and you can also nest your styles just like you would in Sass or something like that. You can also add hover states or anything else you want. So I've gone ahead and made all these styles. Like I said, you can take them straight from the repo, and this is what we're going to be using in the project. So I think now we can go ahead and start our setup of our Firebase database. So what I'm going to do is inside SRC, I'll create a folder called Firebase. And inside there, I'll create a file just called config.js. And we're going to have our Firebase config in here. But for now, let's open up a new browser and go to the Firebase website. That's firebase.google.com. You can just create a new account if you don't have one already. And we're going to click on Get Started. This will now bring up your project list. We're going to add a new project. Let's just call it Shopping Cart App. Click Continue. We don't need Google Analytics, so we can disable that for this project. And it'll just take a second to set up the project. Cool, so once your Firebase project has been set up, you can click on this little cog and go to Project Settings. And let's just have a look here. There are no apps in our project yet. So what we're going to do is click on this little web app icon. Let's just call this Cart App. You can also set up Firebase hosting so we can deploy later. Register the app. Okay, we've already installed Firebase with Yarn. We're going to need this in our main Firebase config file, but for now I'm just going to copy this part, which is our config credentials that we're going to need. So inside the object, you can just copy these key values there and click Next. And you're going to need the Firebase CLI in order to do all of this. So remember earlier I said use the -G flag to install Firebase tools globally on your machine. So make sure you do that and click Next. Hosting, we can worry about that later. So I'm going to just continue to the console. Cool, so now we have our app set up here. And the way we can set this up is through this config that we just copied. But before we do that, I'm going to click on this Firestore database icon on the left. And we're going to actually create our database now. So click on Create Database. And start it in production mode, that's fine. Click Next. You can click the default area, that's fine. And Enable. So that will provision us our Cloud Firestore. Nice. So now our Firestore has been created, and I'm just going to go ahead and make a new collection and call this Cart Items. Click Next. And we can just give it an auto ID for now. This is just a dummy data. So this would be an item in our Cart Items collection, for instance. So let's give it a title, which would be a string. Just say a nice watch. We can add a new field. This is going to be the price. Make that a type of number and just put any value in there. A nice expensive watch. We're also going to need a image field, which would be a string. And we can just kind of put anything there. I'll just quickly go to Unsplash. I'll just copy this address and just put it in there for now. And the last thing we need is the quantity in cart for that item, which is a number. And the default will always be 1. So that is our first cart item in our database. Let's save it. And you can see that it's been created for us just like that. Awesome. We'll get back to that in just a bit. And let's go ahead and do the rest of our Firebase config. Cool. So in order to use Firebase within our app, we're going to need a couple of things from the Firebase package. And one thing to note here is that we are using the absolute latest version of Firebase, which is version 9, which was very recently released. So it's going to be very good to brush up on this new Firebase syntax. So we're going to import initialize app. That's going to come from Firebase /app. Okay. We're also going to need the get firestore function. And that is going to come from Firebase /firestore. We're going to use that to access our firestore, obviously. Then what we need to do is create a variable which is going to have our Firebase config key value pairs from earlier. So we can just say const Firebase config, and I'll just leave that an empty object for now. We'll grab those again because I think I copy and pasted that picture, so it overwrote the details from our config, so we'll have to get them again. And we're going to create a variable here called app. That's going to be equal to the initialize app function. And we need to pass in there our config. So that we're going to pass in Firebase config, which we'll do in just a sec. And we also need to make a variable for our database itself. So we say const db. You can call these anything, obviously, but these just make a lot of sense. So that's going to be equal to the get firestore function, and we pass in there the app variable, which we just created with our Firebase config. And finally, we need to export this default as DB. So we're exporting the database object. And let's go ahead and grab our Firebase config. So in order to do that, you can just click on project settings on the cog in Firebase. And we can go down here, go to config, and there it is. So we just need to copy the key value pairs here, copy those and put them right in this object, just like that. Awesome. Oh, I just realized I misspelled this pretty terribly. Initialize app. Cool, that should do it. Also got to replace it at the bottom here. So it's been quite a lot of setup so far. Hope you guys aren't too tired from it. I know it's quite a mission. The next thing we're going to do, and I think this is the final thing for our setup, is I'm going to create a folder called constants. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste in there the constants that we need. So I'd like you guys to go over to the GitHub repo, which I've linked in the description of the video once again, and head over to the constants folder, and you're going to copy 3 files from there, and you're just going to paste them into your project folder. The first one is cartconstants.js. So this has got all the cart constants that we're going to be using with Redux. So every time we fire off an action with Redux, these constants are going to let Redux know exactly what we want to do, and it helps with our developer experience so that we can know exactly what's going on every time we fire off an action. And we're going to have the same thing for product constants, and then we're going to actually have a list of dummy data products. And this just comes from a website called the Fake Store API, which you can check out if you want some cool dummy data. And this is what we're going to be using for our products. Great. And the last little piece of setup that I would like to do before we get cracking is I'd like to just create the rest of the folders we need, which is going to be an actions folder, which pertains to Redux. We're also going to need a reducers folder, which also pertains to Redux. And we're going to need a containers folder, which is going to contain all our screens. So cool. I think that's it for now, and let's finally get cracking with this project. All right, so I think a good place to start would be to get our product screen up and running. So we're going to need a product item component, which is going to render a singular product item. That's going to be displaying each of these properties of each product. And we're going to display that on our product screen. So firstly, in our components folder, in our product folder, we're going to create a new file called product item.js. I'll generate an arrow function component with RACFE, and you can do that using the React snippets extension, highly recommended. And this product item is going to take in item as a prop. So within our product item, we're going to need a couple of things to display our products. Firstly, we're going to need an image tag, and the source of that image is going to be the item.image, and we can make the alt the item.title. So that'll be the image for our product. Then we're going to need to display the title of the product. So for now, let's just make a h3. And inside the h3, we can render out the item.title. Then we're going to need the price, so we can do a p tag for that. So inside the p tag, let's render out the item.price. And finally, we're going to need the quantity in stock for the item, and we can also use a p tag for that. So let's say p and item.price. And I believe that, wait, not price. This is the quantity in stock, right? And I believe the final one is going to be the description. So we can just use another p tag for that. So that's going to be the item description. And I believe that that's all the necessary information that we're going to need for now in order to display our product. So let's go ahead and create our product screen where we're going to display our product item. So within our containers folder, I'm just going to make a couple more folders. The first one's going to be for things relating to cart. The second one is going to be things relating to products. And the third one is going to be our navbar. So navbar. Cool. So within products, I'm going to create the product screen.js. Let's generate that the same way. Cool. So our product screen. So for now, I think we can just make this pretty simple. We can just put an H1 here and say products. Then underneath that, we're going to be using our styled components to style these properly. But for now, we can simply try to get the products displaying, right? So in order to do that, we're going to have to firstly get our products, of course, and then we're going to have to map through them and display each one. So for now, I think what I'm going to do is simply import the products straight from the file. So that would be import products from 2 folders up. So // constants and products. So we can just use this for now. We are going to be using Redux later, but for now we just want to get it working, right? So I'm just going to straight under the products, open up some curlies and simply map through the products. So in order to do that, we say products, which is this variable we've imported from the product list. We're going to say products.map, use the map function. So for every item in there, we're going to render out essentially a product item. So a product item, let's make sure we do that properly. A product item. Great. And of course we need to pass in the item to this product item. So we can say item is equal to the item, the current item that we're mapping through, right? Cool. So we can go ahead and test this out and see if it works. So I think let's go ahead and start up our app. Let's say Command J to bring up our terminal. And let's say yarn start. Of course, we need to also import our product screen into our app.js file, otherwise it's not going to render, so let's do that. Simply inside our app, I'm just going to, for now, put an H1 to say shopping cart app, and right underneath that we can just simply render our product screen. And hopefully that'll import automatically for you as well. So let's just give that a minute to start up. So it looks like we've got a little bit of an error here. It says we cannot import the products list because it doesn't contain a default export. And the reason for that is if you look at our products, it's being exported as a constant and it's an array of objects. So the way we fix that is we simply import products as an object, just like that. So that should take care of that error. And we've also got apply middleware is not defined in our store.js. So if we have a look at that, you can see that we've got a spelling error there. So let's take care of that. Cool, we've got no errors. And if we have a look in the browser, so that's localhost 3000. There we go, we've got our products coming up, although there is no styling and the images are huge and everything looks ridiculous. So let's maybe take care of that a little bit. Cool, so back over in our product screen component, let's start importing our styled components to try and make our product screen look a little bit better. So we're going to use these imports. We're going to import the page heading and the product container style from our product screen styled components file. And then instead of rendering this H1, we can change that to a page heading. And we can also pass in the primary prop, which will change the color depending on if we do pass that in or not. And then directly underneath that, we're also going to be using our product container style. So let's make a tag for that. Product container style needs to be closing as well. And that is going to wrap where we map through our products. So we can put that directly in there. Let's just see how this is looking so far. So if we open up our browser, still looks ridiculous, but at least it's a little bit closer together. So let's go into our product item, and that should make things look a little bit better. Let's also add the primary prop to the style container as well, and then let's go into our product item. So a product item, and we're going to be doing a couple of things here as well. As you can see, the images are really big and ridiculous looking. So I think we can put a inline style tag into the image, use double squigglies, so style equals double squigglies, and let's just give it a width of 100 pixels. So quite a bit, oh, we need inverted commas there, so 100 pixels. Cool, and the H3, let's give that some inline styling as well. So we say style equals double squigglies, and we're just going to give this a border, which is going to be 1 pixel solid black. we're going to give it a border radius of 2 pixels and some padding, 1 rem of padding. Cool. Then for our price, let's do some stuff there. So the same thing, some inline styling as well. Let's give this a font size of 10 pixels. And let's make it black. So color black. Cool. And now we need to wrap the entire product item inside our product item style. Okay, so let's import that. Product item style. That's going to come from our styles and product screen. So instead of just this div that's wrapping the whole thing, let's replace that with the product item style. Cool, let's have a look at that. Cool, that's definitely looking a little bit better now, but still not so great. Let's also add the primary tag here. Cool, that makes it white instead of gray. So it looks a little bit better with that background. Nice. So there's still a few things going on here that aren't ideal. Firstly, the price is way too small. This text is a little bit too big. And we're also going to need an add to cart button for every single product. So let's go ahead and do that. So back over in our product item, I think I'm going to change this price font size to 30 pixels, and I'm just going to copy this little style section and add that to our description, and let's make that 10 pixels instead. I think that'll work a little bit better. Then we're going to need our add to cart button. So we're going to also import that. It's already a styled button, so we can import that straight from our styled components, and the name of that is cart add button. So we can, underneath our item description, render a cart add button just like that, and we can just say add to cart. Let's also add the primary prop here, and we're not going to use any functionality yet, but let's just add it for now and take a look. Cool, so we have our products, we have our description, we have our price, the title, the image, and our add to cart buttons. Awesome. One thing we can do to make this look a little bit more legitimate is add a currency sign just before the price, and I'm going to make this in South African rands, just like that. So if we have a look at that, nice, we have rands now. Awesome. So obviously at the moment we're just using that products file to render out our products, and what we actually want to do is be using Redux to do this. So in order to do that, we're going to be starting to set up our Redux Flow, and essentially we're going to be using the Redux dispatch option to dispatch an action that is going to be called list the products, and that's going to list our products for us, obviously. So let's get started with that. So before we start implementing Redux into our app, I just want you guys to have a little look at this nice little diagram here, which explains how Redux works quite nicely. So if we start off here in our view, which is of course our front end, which we are creating now, represented by this green square, you can see that from the view, an event comes out, right? Which is, let's say, a button click or something like that. And from there, the event travels up into our action, which is essentially just a function which we create that does some logic for us. And that function or action will then communicate with the Redux store, which contains our reducers. Now the Redux store has quite a few things going on here. We've got our middleware, which could communicate with an API, which in our case would just be our list of products, right? Then we can use the Redux dispatcher to make our reducers manipulate our state for us in various ways. So the point of the reducer is to manipulate our state in any way we want. And that state can then be used again in our view or our front end. So that's just a very quick overview of the flow of Redux, and I think it'll make a little bit more sense once we start coding it. So back over in our app, I think the first thing we can do is start working on our product action to list our products. And we're also going to create that piece of state in our Redux store, right? So in our actions folder, we're going to create a new file, and that's going to be called productactions.js. Now we're going to be using the product constants that we imported for this, so we can import those. And those are going to be in capitals, product underscore list request product list success and product list fail. So product list fail. So those are our constants that we're going to be using with our action, and those are going to come from our constants file. So that's / constants and product constants. Cool. We're also going to need the actual dummy data products themselves. So let's import those. And we can just call those products pretty much exactly the same like we did in our product screen. So we can import products from constants and products. Cool. So in order to make a action for Redux, we need to export it. So we can export const and we can call it list products. And this is going to be where the thunk package comes in. And I hope this makes sense. It's going to be an arrow function. However, it's going to be asynchronous. So we add the async keyword. Then we pass the dispatch in here. So that is going to enable us to use dispatch to fire off this action in any component we want. And we also need another arrow after that, and we can finally open it up like that. So that is the syntax for an asynchronous Redux action. So the first thing we'll need for our list products action is our products data object, which is actually going to be an empty array for now, which we're going to fill with the dummy data, right? So we can just say const products data and just set that to an empty array for now, which we're going to fill. I can never spell products. Products. There we go. Products data. Cool. And then we're going to open up a try catch. And this is quite a convention for these kind of actions because you essentially always want to try to do something, right? You want to fire off certain logic to retrieve some data or do anything you want really. And if that doesn't work, you need some error handling. So a try catch is a really nice way to handle your asynchronous Redux actions. So what are we going to try to do? Well, first of all, we're going to use that dispatch function, and we're going to fire off one of those constants to tell Redux what we're trying to do. And the type that we're going to dispatch is going to be the product list request. And that will fire off as soon as we run this action and tell Redux that we are requesting the product. What we're going to be doing is using that same products array with the dummy data. So we can say products.forEach. So we're going to fire off a function for each product. So for each product, arrow function, we're simply going to push every product into our new array, right? So products data dot push product. Simple. Of course, we could have just implemented the products list in the way we did before, but I think this would be a nice way for you to learn Redux, And I misspelled product again. How could I do that? Product. Goodness. Cool. So we're pushing a new product into our new products array every time. And if that is successful, we want to use the dispatch again. And this time we're going to fire off type of product list success because it was successful. And this time we're also going to have what's known as a payload. Okay. So if you have a payload, you can pretty much use that in your reducer to manipulate your state with the new object or data that you've gotten from your payload. Okay, it'll make a little bit more sense later, I think. But the payload for this action, if it's successful, is going to be that product's data array. Just like that. And in terms of our error handling, we can open that up. And the way we're going to do this is also dispatch a type. And the type for this is going to be product list fail, right? Because it's failed. And we're also going to have a payload for this, but that is pretty much just going to be the error. So we can say payload, and a nice way to do this, we can say, so if there's an error response, and there's also an error response message, so .data.message, if there's both of those, then we'll show the error response message .data.message. And in the case that both of those aren't present, then we'll simply just show the error, right? So just error like that. And we're pretty much just going to be using that for every, oh, sorry, this should be the error message. So all this really means is if we get a response from the error, we'll show the message from that. Otherwise, we'll just show the actual message from the error. So it's a nice little way of handling errors there, which we'll use throughout this project. So now that we have our product action to list our products set up quite nicely, and remember we're going to pass through the product's data as an array of objects through our payload when we get a type of product list success through Redux. Okay. So the next thing we're going to have to do in order to make this work is we're going to have to create the reducer for this and also add it to our Redux state. So in order to do that, we're going to go into reducers and create our product reducer.js. And we're also going to need the same constants that we used in our action. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy those. And in order to create a reducer, we also need to export it as a variable. So we can say export const product list reducer, right? So this is going to be the reducer responsible for listing our products as well as manipulating our state accordingly. Okay. And a reducer is always going to take in pretty much two things. Okay. The first thing is the state, or the initial state, I should say. And in our case, our initial state is going to be equal to a products array, which is just empty. Okay, so we can say products, and that's just an empty array. Cool. So that's our initial state. And the other thing we need to pass in is going to be the action. So we can simply just say action for that. Turn that into an arrow function and open it up. And the convention for a reducer is we use a switch which is going to determine what type we're firing off. So we can use a switch, regular JavaScript switch, and the switch is going to be using the action type. Okay. So whatever the action type is going to determine how we manipulate our state. So let's open that up. And let's say we have the case where we're trying to request our product list, right? So we can say case product list request. So in that case, what do we need to do? Well, we need to manipulate our state somehow. So the way we do that is by using a return, and we open that up, and we can set a variable called loading equal to true, because we're currently requesting the products, right? And for now, the products can just be that same empty array, right? So that is pretty much our product list request case. Then we do need to add the case for if our product list request was successful. So that's product list success. If the type is that, we need to return loading as false because it was successful. And then we need to add our products into our store, okay? And the way we do that is we can just set a variable called products and set that to the action.payload, okay? So the payload is going to be passed through our action, and that is going to be put into our product state when we fire off this product list success, okay? And that happens in our action as well. So I hope that makes sense. Finally, if the product list fails, so that's product list fail. If that happens, then we're going to return loading as false again. And then we're just going to fill up an error in our state with the action.payload, because remember, we did that in our action. And I'm just going to add a default here. So a default for our switch, and that's just simply going to return the state as it is, okay? And that should pretty much do it for our product reducer. So we just need to add this to our Redux store in our state. So I'll show you how you do that now. So if we head back over to our Redux store file, what we're going to need to do is import our product list reducer, okay? And that is going to come from our reducer that we just created, of course. So let's import the product list reducer from, and a nice auto import there, reducers/product reducer. Okay, and then what we do is inside our combine reducers function, we can set basically little parts of the state here, which is really nice. So I'm going to call this products list and set that to our product list reducer, just like that. We're also going to have the cart reducer part of the state, which we'll do in just a bit, but that should do it for now. So in order to use our list products action on our product screen, we're going to have to obviously import that and use it there. And we're going to be using the Redux dispatch function in order to do that, as well as the use selector function to select this part of the state that we just created. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Over in our products screen, we're going to be needing a few things from React Redux in order to achieve this. Okay, so I'm going to import use dispatch from React Redux, as well as use selector. So that's going to allow us to select our products list part of the state. Okay. And what we do with the dispatch function is we simply set it to a variable. Okay, so I'll just say const dispatch equals use dispatch, and as a function. So we can now use that dispatch function whenever we want. Okay. Next thing we want to do is create our actual products list, right? So we actually need to access that part of the state in our Redux store, and the way we can do that is with the use selector function. So we can simply say const products list equals the use selector function. Okay. And the use selector function can take in the state, that part of the state, of course, and that is going to be state.products list. because that is what we named it in Redux, remember? And now what we can do is from that variable, we can destructure the values that we want. So we can say const, we've got the loading value, we've got the error value, and we've got the products themselves, okay? So we can destructure that from products list, just like that. And now, instead of importing these dummy data products, it's going to be using the products straight from our state. So that is how awesome Redux is, and hopefully this works. Let's check it out. But before we do that, there is one more thing we have to do in order to make this work, and that's actually use the dispatch function to fire off the action that we created to list our products, because that's actually what's going to fill the state in Redux. Okay, so let's import that action. It's called list products, and it's from our actions. So actions and product actions. And the way we do this is by using the useEffect hook from React. So we can say react.useEffect, and that is going to fire off our dispatch when the page loads, right? And what we're going to dispatch is the list products action. So we just dispatch list products just like that. And we will need to add as a dependency for the useEffect our dispatch function. Otherwise, it will complain at us. Okay, so I believe that is everything we need to list our products through Redux. So let's check it out. So we're back over on our web page, and you can see that our products are successfully being pulled from our Redux store from the product list part of our state. And if we inspect and go to our Redux dev tools and we click on state, you can see when the page loads, we fire off the product list request action, or type I should say, and then once that's successful, we fire off product list success. And if we open up the product list piece of the state, we've got the loading variable, which is false because it was successful, and we have our products, which is an array of objects. So that's exactly what we want, and we seem to be in a good state so far. And one more thing we can do in our product screen is make use of these loading and error variables, which we're getting from our product list state. So what we can do is just below this div here, we can open up some squigglies and say, if loading is true, then we can just render a div that just says loading, and otherwise, if error is true, if there is an error, then we can just render a div with the error inside, and otherwise we can simply render our page, right? Although we'll have to wrap it in just some stock JSX tags, otherwise it will complain. Oops. Cool. So I think what we can go ahead and do next is start to set up our navbar as well as our card screen page. So let's go ahead and do that. So under navbar, I'm going to create the navbar.js. Let's generate that. Nice. And the navbar is going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to turn this div into a stock JSX element. And inside there, we're going to have a UL. We're going to have a list item. And inside there, we're going to have a link. And in order to use the link, I need to import that from React Router DOM. So let's import link from React Router DOM. And then let's create a link. And that is going to go to / products. And we'll actually make this not self-closing, so we can render inside here the text products, just like that. And then we will need just one more. It's going to be very simple. Like I said, this one's going to go to the cart screen. So cart. Okay. Then for our styling, we're going to just use our styled components again. So let's import navbar style, navbar style from the styles, and it's actually in the product screen file. Okay. So right below the stock JSX tag, I'm going to wrap the whole thing in the navbar style tag. Okay. So navbar style, move the UL into there. Okay. Cool. And then let's go to our app.js file. And this is where we're going to implement our navbar, right? So we don't want this silly H1 here. We want our navbar. And the nice auto import there. That's awesome. And we're going to be using React Router DOM here. So I'm going to import from there browser router as router and a root. And we're going to need to wrap our entire app in the router and move it in there. Nice. Now, just underneath our navbar, we're going to wrap our product screen in a root. So root, close that. And let's move the product screen component in there. And this root's path, the exact path, is going to be /products. Right? And the same thing for our cart screen, which we haven't created yet. So we will do that in a sec, but let's just set up the root for now. So I can just copy and paste this one actually. So this root is going to go to /cart, and we're going to render our cart screen. Okay. And let's go ahead and create our cart screen. So underneath containers and inside the cart folder, let's create a cart screen.js file, generate that. And for now, I'll simply put a h1 for cart, and I'll just put a div here for now. And the idea inside here is to map through our cart items, and for each one we're going to display a cart item component, which we're also going to create right now. So we map through our cart items and display a cart component, a cart item component for each one. So that's just a comment for now. We will definitely get there in a sec. So let's go ahead and create the cart item. So that would be under components, cart item.js. Let's generate that one. Cool. And we're going to do a few things in order to display each cart item here. Our cart item is going to take in as a prop the specific item, of course. And let's go ahead and create our various HTML elements that are going to display our cart item information. So first of all, we'll need the image, and the source of that image would be the item.image, and the alt for that can be the item.name. And let's just make it a little smaller because we know it's going to be huge. So let's just use some inline styling here with double squigglies. And let's set a max width of 150 pixels and also a max height of 150 pixels. Cool. So that's our image, and underneath that we're going to have a div for now. We will use our styled components in a little bit, but for now let's just display an h3 that says title, title, and underneath that an h4 that is going to contain our item.title, and below that these are just the little pieces of info for each cart item, of course, which we will have to pass in through our cart item. So we'll make another div, same kind of thing for the price, so h3 that says price, and let's make a h4 for that as well, and inside there we're going to render out the item.price. And let's just do a couple things for that. I'll make a span, and we want to display the currency, and I'm going to put this one in rands for all the South Africans out there. And let's just put some inline style on this span just to make the currency letter a little bit more pronounced and look a bit better. Let's say font weight, make that 600 and give it some margin right, just a very small thing, 2 pixels, just to give it a little bit of space. Cool. Then the last thing we're going to need, another div for our last bit of information, which is going to be our quantity in our cart for each item. So another h3 that says quantity in cart, and underneath that we're going to have an input which is going to tell our cart item how many of this specific item is currently in our cart, and the type of that input will be a number, of course. And just for now I'll also just set a minimum value, so that's just min, and that would be 1. Okay, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but I think that's alright for now. The last thing we will need in our cart item is a button to delete that item. So for now I'll just make a button tag and say delete, and we'll deal with that a little bit later. But I think for now what we want to do is just get our items from our Firebase database and make them display on our cart screen using this cart item component, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So back over in our cart screen component, what we want to do now is what we said over here. We want to map through our cart items array, which we will eventually get from our database, but for now we're just going to use some dummy data, and we want to display our cart item component for each one. So let's just create some dummy data cart items for now. So I'll say const cart items, and that's an array of objects, and each one will need a title. So let's just call this amazing shirt, give it a price, that should be a number, and then we need an image, which is a string, and I'll just put anything in there for now. And we also need a quantity in cart value, which can just be 1 by default. So in order to iterate through this array, inside our div here, let's do exactly that. So we need to open up some braces and say cart items dot map, open up a map, and then for each item we want to go ahead and display a cart item component. So cart item, close that, and then we just need to pass in that specific item that we're rendering through, right? So item equals item. Then we of course need to import our cart item. So let's do that. Import cart item. Cool. And if we look at our terminal, in app.js, our cart screen is not defined, so let's import that. Let's hope this little trick works. Nice. So you basically just click right on the end of the word here with your cursor and you say control space, and that should bring up the auto import options, which is a very nice trick. Cool. Now before we check if our cart items are rendering correctly on our cart screen, I'd just like to add a real image in here. So that's just from Unsplash. You can just add any image address you want. So let's have a look there. And you can see that our one cart item is being rendered out successfully, although it does look quite silly. So let's take care of that. Right, so we're back over in our cart screen component, and we're just going to be importing our styled components here to make it look a bit better. So those are going to be cart container style and the page heading. And those come from our styled components file, which is cart screen styled components file. And then what we're going to do is, instead of the h1, render a page heading, and instead of this div, we will render the cart container style, just like that. Then back over in our cart item, we're going to be using our styled components as well. And those are going to be cart item style, nice auto import, the cart delete button style, and the cart info style, just like that. Then we're going to be wrapping the whole item. So instead of this all containing div here, we're going to wrap that in a cart item style tag. And then just make sure you replace the bottom one as well. Cool. Then for each little info section, we're going to change those divs to the cart info style tags. So that's for the title section, for the price section, and for the quantity and cart section. Just like that. Nice. And finally, our button is going to be the cart delete button style, just like that. Nice. So let's just have a look how we're doing, and you can see that things look a lot better now. Nice. Now, in order to display the value for our quantity and cart, we need to add it here. So we can say value is equal to the item dot quantity in cart. And then we should see 1 here. Nice. Right, that's great. So what we want to do now is, instead of rendering out our dummy data cart items, we want to actually fetch them from our Firebase database. And we're going to be using a Redux action in order to do this. Okay, so we're going to need to create the list cart items action. So let's go ahead and do that. So back over in our app, we can go to our actions and create a file called cart actions.js. Then we're going to have to import our necessary constants from our file. So I'll just copy and paste that, just like that. And we're also going to be needing our database file from Firebase. All right, and then we're going to be needing a good couple of functions that are going to come from the Firebase Firestore library, okay? So you can copy these functions here. There's collection, get docs, doc, set doc, get doc, delete doc, and update doc. So we're going to be using those to update our necessary documents, of course. So we're going to create our list items action now. And we're going to be using the same syntax for this list cart items action, which is similar to our products list action. So we say export const list cart items, and that's an arrow function with the same syntax as before. We're adding in our async with our dispatch function for Redux. So dispatch. So we can use that in our components, and we open that up. And we're going to be needing our DB file, our Firebase DB file, of course. And we're going to be simply making an array of objects, which are our cart items, and then setting that into our state, right? So what we can do is set a variable, a mutable variable. So we say let cart data is just an empty array. Now we are going to create a function which is going to fetch our cart items from our database. So we can name this an async function, and it's going to be called get cart items. And as an argument, it's going to be taking in a DB file, a Firebase DB file. So we can open that up and say const cart call for cart collection, and we can set that to the collection function from Firebase, which we need to pass in our DB, which is being passed in from here in our function. It'll make a little bit more sense in a bit. And we need to pass in as a second argument which collection we're targeting, which is the cart items collection in our Firebase database, okay? Then we need to create a snapshot of that. So a snapshot is essentially just like taking a picture of the database in its current form. So we can say const cart snapshot equals await, because we're using asynchronous functions here. So we're going to await first the get docs function from Firebase, and from there that's where we need to pass in the collection. So get docs needs to take in the collection, which is of course the cart items collection, which we just created. So we can just pass in that variable right there, okay? Then we can create one last variable here, which is going to be the actual list of cart items. So we can call that cart list, and that is going to be equal to the snapshot that we just created. So that's cart snapshot, and now we need to access the docs from there. So we're going to say .docs, and then we're going to map through those docs, okay? So .map, open that up, and then for every doc we are going to access the data from each individual document, and the way we're going to do that is by saying doc.data as a function, okay? And then finally, I'd just like to return our actual cart list from this function, okay? So that's our get cart items, function. Nice. So we have that function available, and what we're going to need to do is open up a try catch block, and this is kind of conventional for Redux actions. You'd usually want to try to do something, and if that doesn't work, you want to handle the error accordingly, right? Cool. So firstly, we need to use the dispatch, and we're going to dispatch the type of cart list request to Redux, so the Redux knows what we're doing. Now, what we're going to do now is essentially this variable that we created here, this empty array, cart data. We want to fill this with the cart list from our database, right? So that's pretty simple to do. We can just say cart data equals await our function, which is get cart items. So get cart items, and of course we need to pass in our DB, and remember we're importing our DB from our Firebase config, right? So that's going to tell Firebase which database to access, and that should give us our cart items into our state. However, in order to fill the state, we're going to have to dispatch the type of cart list success, and we can add as a payload for that the cart data array. Perfect. And in order to handle the error, we can dispatch the type of cart list fail, and the payload of that is simply going to be the same kind of error handling before. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that. So that should fill our payload up with the relevant, oops, I should be moving that inside here. So the type of cart list fail, and that should handle our error for us. So I believe that should hopefully take care of our list cart items function. Essentially all we're doing is we're accessing the database, we create an empty array, and we make a function called get cart items. We pass in the relevant database, and we simply set that cart data array to our get cart items function with our database passed in. Then we dispatch the success type, and our payload for that is going to be our cart data. So we can now access this in our Redux store, right? But in order to do that, we need to create our reducer. Then we need to create the part of the state for cart items. So let's go ahead and do that. Cool, so let's save this, and let's go to our reducers file and create our cart reducers file, cartreducers.js. And inside there, we're going to need our constants again. So I'll just copy paste those. And now we're going to create our reducer for listing our cart items. So you can say export const list cart items reducer. Quite a long one, but it makes sense. So remember, a reducer is going to take in the initial state, which is going to be an empty array called cart items. Cart items, empty array. And of course, then we'll just take in the action. So action, and you can turn that into an arrow function and open that up. Now for our cart items list reducer, we do the standard switch on the action type and open that up. So in the case of a cart list request, so cart list request, we're going to return loading is true, and the cart items will just be an empty array, right? So that's when we are requesting the cart items. In the case that it is successful, so case cart list success, we are then going to return loading as false, and our cart items are going to be coming from the action payload, because remember, in our action we're filling the payload with the cart items from our database, right? Then we need to handle the case for cart list failing. So we can say case cart list fail. And for that, we need to return loading as false, of course, because it failed. And we can just set the error to the action.payload, because remember, we're filling it up in the action in the exact same way. And I just want to add a default case for the switch to say default is just going to return state as it is. So default is just return state. So hopefully that is it for our cart list items reducer. The next step would be to import this into our Redux store file and set that to a certain piece of state which is going to pertain to our cart items. So let's do that. So in our store.js file, we can import the reducer which we just created, and that should be the list cart items reducer, right? So we can import list cart items reducer from our cart reducers file. Then in order to use this within our combine reducers function, we can just say cart items list. So we're just creating that for our Redux state, and that is going to be set to the list cart items reducer. So this should tell Redux exactly how to handle that. Nice. So we're back over in our cart screen file, and of course we don't want to render out this dummy data anymore. I'll just comment that out for now, and we're going to need a couple of things in order to access our cart items from our Redux state. Okay, so we're going to need use dispatch as well as use selector. And use selector is what we're going to use to select that part of the state, and that's going to come from React Redux. Okay, and we are also going to need our actual action in order to dispatch it, right? So let's import that. So that's list cart items, list cart items, and that's from our actions file, remember? Two folders up, and then actions and cart actions, list cart items. So the way that we are going to do this is we need to set a couple of variables first, and the first one is going to be our dispatch variable. So you pretty much do this every time you want to use dispatch. You can just say const dispatch equals use dispatch as a function. So we will now be able to use that, and the way we're going to select the actual cart items from our state is with a variable and the use selector function. So we can say const cart items list equals the use selector function, and we need to pass in the state there and an arrow function, and then we want to access the state dot cart items list, because that's what we called it in our store, right? And then now what we can do is destructure the values we want from there. So we can say const, we have a loading variable, we have an error variable, and the actual cart items themselves, right? So we destructure that from the cart items list, just like that. Now, this cart items that we're mapping through should be the one from our state, which is being fetched from our database. But the problem now is that we need to actually call this list cart items action somewhere, and the way we're going to do that is by using the React use effect hook, which is going to run as soon as the page loads. So we can say react.use effect and open that up. And we're simply going to be firing off with dispatch. So we might want to actually move this down a bit so we can use dispatch. And we're just going to be dispatching, so dispatch, and we're going to dispatch this action list cart items, which should fill our state for us. List cart items, right? So we dispatch that as a function. And of course, we need to pass in our array dependencies, and we just need to pass in the actual dispatch function, or else React will complain. Cool, so I think that should be everything we need in order to map through our cart items from our database and display them. Now, one thing you might have an issue with is in your Cloud Firestore, over in your Rules tab, you can see that you have a section here that says allow read and write if false. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just going to delete this and just say allow read and write. Okay? And that should enable us to access any file from our database no matter what. Usually you would want some more secure rules in a production app, of course, but like I said, for the purposes of this tutorial, you can just allow reading and writing. Cool, so let's see if that works. And you can see that our one item from our Firebase database is being displayed in our cart. Awesome. And the final thing we can do over in our cart screen component is just make use of those loading and error variables very simply. And we can open up squigglies here and say if it's loading, we can just put a div with loading. Otherwise, if there's an error, we can just put a div with the actual error inside, so error. And otherwise, if there's no loading or error variables present, we can just simply render out what we need to, which is our cart screen, of course. So we can put that right in there. And it's just going to complain to me right now because we would just need to wrap our elements here in a stock tag. So that should fix that right up. Nice. Cool, so we have our cart items coming from our database using Redux, and we also have our products coming from Redux, which is just dummy data, but that's all good. So I think what we can go ahead and do now is start working on our actual cart functionality, right? So when we click on add to cart, we want a cart item to be added to our Firebase database. So let's go ahead and start with that. So back over in our app, the first thing we'll have to do is create the action, the Redux action for adding a new product into our cart, right? So in our cart actions, let's create it. You can say export const, call this add product to cart. Okay, and as a parameter, we're going to be taking in the new cart item. So whatever item the user clicks on, of course, we use our arrow and a sync, pass in dispatch again, and another arrow and open it up. Right, so for our add to cart function, we're going to be essentially building the object and adding it to the database. So we can say const new cart product, which is just going to be an empty object for now. Then what we're going to do for this is actually every time we add a item, we're going to be using a package to give it an ID. Okay, and that package is called React ID generator. So let's go ahead and install that quickly. So we've just got some warnings there, but that's all right. I'll just make a new terminal and say yarn add React ID generator. So let's do that and wait for that to finish. Cool, so once that's done, you can just import it like this. So that's import next ID from React ID generator, okay? So that'll give every one of our new products a unique ID, which is quite cool. And the way we can initialize that is by saying const new item ID equals next ID as a function. So that'll just generate a new ID every time, right? Cool. So we're going to need to open up our try catch here again. So a try catch block. And the first thing we want to do is dispatch a type, a Redux type of cart item add request, because that's what we're doing. Then we're going to set a variable for our Firebase database as a reference for the current item. Okay, so we can say const cart item ref, and that will be equal to the doc function from Firebase. So this will access one specific document. Okay, the first thing we need to pass in there is the actual DB object. We want to access the cart items collection. That's the second parameter. And finally, we just need to specify an ID for the new item that we're creating. And we can simply use the new item ID that we've created using that ID generation package. So we pass that in as the third parameter. So we just say new item ID. So that'll create our ref for our new item. Then we want a snapshot of the database again. So we can say const doc snap equals await get doc. So this is another Firebase function to get one single doc. And in there we will pass in the cart item ref. Right? So we just want to use this ref to see essentially if the item is already in our cart or not, because we need to do different things depending on that, right? So we can actually open up a if else here. So I'll just say if and else. So we want to check basically if the doc snap, and we can use a function called .exists, which is a Firebase function. So if that document exists, then we can create an existing item variable. So we can say const exist item equals the doc snap dot data. Okay, dot data as a function. So that'll actually access the information from that specific document. So if there's an exist item, we can just make an alert, and we can just say the exist item dot title, so the name of whatever item exists, and just concatenate a string and say is already in your cart, right? And we would still want to dispatch the type of cart item add fail, cart item add fail, right? So that's if there's already an existing item of that name in the cart. So if there isn't, that's our else block, of course. We can just do a console log to help us out here and just say there's no such document, so no such document. Right? So then what we want to do is just set that exact item into our database. And the way we can do that is by saying await set doc, so the Firebase function set doc, and in here we need to pass in the specific document, so we say doc for that, and we pass in the same parameters as we did before, so our DB file, the cart items collection, and the new item ID, right? The new item ID to generate our ID for us. Then we can open up here after a comma and some squigglies for the setDoc function. We can now add our item essentially, and that is going to come from this new cart item that we pass into this action, right? So we can say the ID of the new document is equal to the new item ID. The title is equal to the new cart item dot title, etc. So we're just setting our new Firebase document with the values that come from the specific item that the user clicks on, right? So price is equal to new cart item dot price, and we have the image, which comes from new cart item dot image, and finally the quantity in our cart can just be default 1, right? Because we just click it once and it's going to set it 1 time. Then we can just make an alert that says the item space concatenate the new cart item dot title plus string has been successfully added. So we'll know obviously if it's successful or not. So it has been successfully added. Then finally we have to handle it with Redux, so we can use dispatch, and we want to dispatch the type of cart item add success. It was successful, and we need a payload, which is going to be the new cart product object, right? So the new cart product object. New cart product. Nice. And we can just simply set that to whatever object was passed in, right? So we can say new cart product equals the new cart item. Cool. And then we can just add our error handling here the same way as we did before. So let's just actually make an alert to make it more easy to see what's going on every time we add something. So I'll just say failed to add, and then concatenate the new cart item dot title, and then we can just simply add the error there. So that will help us out a bit. And finally we want to dispatch the type of cart item add fail, and for our payload we want to add the error in the same way as we did before. So I'm just going to copy and paste that again, right? So that should take care of our error handling, and hopefully this should be good for our add product to cart function. So the next thing we need to do is add our reducer for this. So let's go to our cart reducers, and we can create the reducer for adding an item to our cart. So add item to cart reducer. That's going to take in the state, and that's going to be a new cart item, which is just going to be an empty object. Then it'll take in the action as well. Let's open that up. Oops, I forgot const here, export const. Right, so we open up a switch on the action type, so action.type, and let's use our constants here. So in the case of a cart item add request, cart item add request, we will return the state as it was. So we use the spread operator like this. So the state as it was, and then for our cart item as part of the state, as an array we can say firstly the state.cart items as there were, and then the action.payload, which is going to be the new cart item, right? So action.payload, just like that. And in the case that it is successful, so case of cart item add success, we would return loading as false, and the new cart item would be the action payload, because we set that in our action just as we did before. And in the case of a fail, so case of cart item add fail, then we would just return loading as false, and the error will come from the action payload. So hopefully you can see the pattern that's going on here. Cool, I think that should be all right for this. Let's just add our default case again. So default, we'll just return the state as it is. Okay, cool. So in order to get our add to cart Redux action working, we need to do that in our product item. Okay, and we're going to need to dispatch that action when the add to cart button is clicked on. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our components folder, in our product item component, we need to do a couple of things. So we're going to need the use dispatch again from React Redux. And we're going to need our add product to cart action that we created. So let's import that. Add product to cart. And that's from our actions file. So actions and cart actions. Then we do the standard set dispatch to use dispatch. So dispatch equals use dispatch as a function. And now we're going to create our function for adding to cart, which is simply going to dispatch the add to cart action, and the item will be passed in there. So we can say const add to cart handler, and we can make that an arrow function. Open it up. And we're simply going to dispatch the add product to cart action, and we're going to pass in the current item. And that's pretty much it. So we need to obviously bind this to our add to cart button. So let's add the on click here, on click, and that is equal to our add to cart handler, just like that. And I believe that should be it. So let's go ahead and test this out in our app. So we're back over here and I've got the Redux tools open. And if we click on add to cart for this item, we've got item men's cotton jacket was successfully added. And you can see our relevant actions firing off here. And if we go to our cart screen, you can see our new item here with a quantity of 1, and if we go into our cart items list in our Redux tools, you can see that it's been added there. Perfect. And if we go over to our Firebase database, you can see that it has been added here as well with our newly generated ID. Awesome. Right, so now that we've handled our add to cart function successfully, let's go ahead and create our Redux action for updating our cart quantity for a specific item. So we can say in our cart actions file, we can say export const update cart quantity, and that is going to take in the cart item ID as well as the quantity, the new quantity, of course. And let's make that async with dispatch and open that up. Let's do our try catch in here. Oops. Try catch block. Nice. So, right, when we update the cart quantity, if we first want to dispatch, oops, error, dispatch, we want to dispatch the type of cart item update request. Then we need to use the update doc function from Firebase to update the quantity of that specific document. So in order to do that, we can await update doc update doc, and we need to pass in the specific document, which we can access with the doc function. Pass in our DB. We want to access cart items, and we need to specify the cart item ID. Oops, that's the third parameter. So cart item ID, right? Then as the second argument, we need to open this up like this. And then the property that we want to update is quantity in cart. So quantity in cart, and set that to the new quantity that we pass into this action. Cool. So if that all works as expected, we can go ahead and dispatch the type of cart item update success. Cart item update success. And then for our error handling, we want to do kind of the same thing we've been doing. Dispatch the type of cart item update fail. Cart item update fail. And the payload will be the error exactly the same way we've been doing in our other actions. And I would also like to add as a payload, when we are successful, that would be the new quantity, right? So we can just say quantity there. Cool, cool. And another thing we did forget to do is add the add cart item part of our state in our Redux store. So let's quickly do that. We can just call this add to cart and set that to our add to cart reducer, which I believe is called add item to cart reducer. So let's do that and import it as well. It's also from the cart reducers file. Nice. So hopefully you guys are understanding how we create reducers and actions and add little pieces to our state regarding each of those aspects of our app. Now the only things we have left to do in terms of functionality for our cart are updating the amount of item for a specific item in the cart, as well as deleting a specific item. So I won't be doing the exact same process for those, but I will still be firing off the events. And hopefully you guys did take something away from Redux actions and reducers from this tutorial, but let's go ahead and make our cart work fully. So let's go back over to our cart item component. So that's cart item, and we want to handle the input here to update the cart value whenever we increment or decrement it, right? So in order to do that, we need to import our Redux action, which is responsible for updating the cart quantity. So let's do that. So that's update cart quantity, I believe, from actions and cart actions. And we're also going to need the dispatch function from Redux again. So that's use dispatch. There we go. Now we always need to set that to the function. So const dispatch equals use dispatch as a function. Now we're going to be using some React state here to control the quantity that comes from the input, okay? And then we're going to fire off the Redux action to update the quantity based on that, okay? So in order to use the React state, we can say const quantity and set quantity equals react.useState. And as a default value, I'm going to add the item.quantity in cart, which will usually be 1. But if we look down here, we've got this min value on our input that could be confused as a string because of how it's set up here. So I'm just going to wrap this in a explicit number casting function, just like this. Nice. Now we're going to want to create a function for updating the cart quantity, which is essentially just going to dispatch our Redux action again and update the quantity in the database, right? So we can just say const handle cart quantity, and this is going to take in the specific item we're working with, and it's going to be an arrow function. And we're simply going to dispatch the update cart quantity action. And as arguments there, remember we have two arguments. The first one is the item, and the second one is the quantity. And just to be safe, I'm also going to wrap this in a number casting function just like this. So we know it's definitely going to be a number, right? Ooh, what happened? There we go. Cool, cool. So we're going to have to do just a couple of things to our input here, which correlates to the amount of that specific item that we have in our cart. And you can see over here where it says quantity and cart, we've got an input with a type of number. The minimum value is 1. And the value of that is currently the item.quantity and cart. So we actually are going to change this to just the local quantity state, okay? So that's just QTY, because we're setting that up here. It's already defaulted to that value anyway, okay? So in order to set this dynamically when the user changes this value, we're going to need an onChange event. So we can say onChange, set that to curlies, and I'm actually going to add an E event in here with an arrow and open up some more curlies. And when you do this, it essentially enables you to execute multiple functions within one onChange parameter. Or it could be an onClick or any kind of event like that. So the first thing we want to do is set our state. So that's set QTY to the e.target.value. So whatever value the user puts in there will be set in our local state for this component. And of course, every time we want to do that, we also want to change the quantity of the value in cart in our database. And that's going to be handled by our handle cart quantity function. So let's put that in, handle cart quantity, and we're going to pass in the item, just like that. Cool. Now, before we test this out, I just want to go to our handle cart quantity function and add a console log here. Let's console log the item as well as the quantity. Cool. And if we go back to our app, and if we click on our increment button, you can see the values are being logged there. And if we go to our database, might just take a second to update, but you can see that our quantity and cart value is successfully updating as well. Nice. So the final little piece of functionality that we're going to need is to be able to delete items from our cart. And I'm not going to be making a reducer for this one. I'll just make an action and fire off the necessary types for Redux because it's very simple actually, and I'll show you what we do right now. So back in our cart actions file, let's make the delete from cart action. So we can say export const delete item from cart, and we're going to take in the cart item ID as a parameter, an arrow function with async and dispatch as usual. Oops. So pass in dispatch so we can fire it off, open it up, and let's do our try catch as normal. And the first thing we're going to do is dispatch a cart item remove request. So the type of cart item remove request. So it's just telling Redux what we're doing really. We're not really using any state necessarily for this delete function. So just to be clear on that. So all we're going to do for this delete function is we're simply going to await, as we are asynchronous here, we're going to await delete doc. That's the Firebase function. The first thing we need to pass in is our database object. Then we want to access the cart items collection, and we simply need to pass in the cart item ID to delete that specific document. And we can just make an alert that says the cart item ID was successfully deleted. Just like that. And then we can finally dispatch a cart item remove success. So cart item remove success. Nice. And that's pretty much it. Very, very simple for deleting items. And for our error instance, we can also dispatch type of cart item remove fail, and the payload will be our standard error handling like we've been doing. So I'll just copy and paste that in again. Cool. So let's go ahead and attach this to our cart item delete button. So let's head back over to our cart item component to do that. So we're in cart item and we need to import that action. So that's delete from cart. And we also need to create the function like we did for handling the quantity update. So const, let's call it handle cart delete. And that is going to take in, it's an arrow function that is going to take in the cart item ID. So cart item ID, and open that up. And then we're simply going to dispatch. We're going to dispatch the delete from cart action. So delete from cart, and we're going to pass in the cart item ID, simply just like that. All right. And now we just need to bind this to the button in order to make it work. So we can go down to our button and we can add an on click here. And we can pass in an arrow in here. And we can say handle cart delete. And we're going to be passing in the item.id, just like that. Cool. So we're back over in our app and I just want to add a few items. Let's add that nice shirt. Maybe that nice ring there. And let's go back to our cart. You can see our items here. Let's try to delete this shirt. So delete. And we can see ID2 was successfully deleted. Cool. But now you can see that we actually need a page refresh in order to see the item being deleted in real time. So I'm just going to go back over to our delete function, and after we make the alert, I'm just going to use window.location.reload just to reload the page automatically. And let's check out how that works. So let's go back to cart. Let's delete the ring. ID3 was successfully deleted, and we have an automatic refresh. Nice. And if you head over to the database, you can obviously see that the necessary items have been deleted from there as well. So that's going to do it for this build, this tutorial. I know this app is not completely perfect or amazing in terms of being a production app or anything like that, but hopefully you guys did learn something about Redux or React or Firebase. And I hope you've enjoyed your time with Deal Development, and please do subscribe to the channel for more interesting tutorials in the future. Thank you so much guys for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye bye.